right, Carlton King, former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security and armed governmental personal protection operations, but actually majors in on geopolitics. This week, we're looking at part 2 of the programme I started last week. Well, this is the problem, isn't it? And look, it's fantastic we're having this discussion again, and I say only here. But this is the thing. Let's be realistic. We have now got the push from the state dealing with violence against women and girls. Right? Absolutely correct. Not a problem. However, let's take the figures.
Yeah.
And the figures say, and strangely enough, it's around about the same as it was in the Second World War for the Soviet us against the Germans of 1 to 7. For every one woman murdered, there are 7 men. Right?
Yeah.
But if you push women and girls fear, then it's giving women and girls anxiety to go out on the street as the victims, right? When actually they're not the victims.
Yeah.
Right? The reality is I think the most dangerous sentence, let's use that terminology, in the English language is, what are you looking at?
Yeah.
And it's not a sentence or statement that women often get. Now, the problem is that they're moving along that because in some ways we're saying women and girls are exactly the same as men, therefore should act the same as men. So when we get murders happening in women and girls, and I'm speaking as a criminologist now, way of performing murders that generally weren't performed before. Let me give you an example. Generally, most murders performed by women against men were generally done with something like, or even other women, poison or something like that. You know, poison their food, blah, 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 right? Oftentimes you got away with it because you couldn't see the poison was there. But they were crimes of murder, of homicide, that were not physically violent generally. I'm talking United Kingdom. Now, in the United Kingdom, the reason for that is, of course, that the prevalence of firearms is not there, right? So if you had a firearm and you had a gun, it's much easier to shoot somebody than it is to stab somebody, right? Now you're getting much more of stabbings of people. I'm not talking when it used to happen before when men were asleep or whatever, but I'm talking now awake. Right? Because what you're saying to the women is you're exactly the same and you can act violently like a man can. And if you look at some of the programs you get, your EastEnders, your Coronation Street, whatever it might be, you'll see women acting violent towards a man and say, if you do that, mate, I'll kick your head in, blah, 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 which would not have been articulated before. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's giving you a message. That's the message to take. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because when you do that, you work at this problem from 2 sides. One is you're making people more aggressive, rather than naturally cunning, and sensibly cunning. And then the other side of that coin is you're making them more fearful, when it's not required. So you're actually probably creating that anxiety. I'm going to ask you about that. Creating that anxiety because of what you're doing. Because that question, every guy knows, and this is the difference between men and women on that, every guy knows from the time that he was in the playground and 4 and 5 years of age, right, that when that question came out, what you're looking at, you had 3 ways of dealing with it. One was to say nothing, and your reaction might then get you beaten up because you're weak, maybe. The other was to come back and say, I'm looking at you, mate, and that's obviously aggressive. Right? and then you're standing yourself, you're in a fighting stance anyway, because you know it's going to lead to a fight. Or the
Mm.
other one was probably just to turn away, which may lead the fella jumping on your back because he figures you're weak.
Yeah.
Right? So two out of the three is going to get you hammered. The third one might get you hammered if you don't know what you're doing. and
Yeah.
so and so it's a very dangerous situation. You can go in any pub on any night of the day, and that question's going to be put to
Yeah.
some men, and that's how a lot of them get killed.
Yeah.
Right? So women haven't had to deal with that up to now. So haven't learned that response situation. What women have learned now is I'm looking at you, mate. Yeah,
Mm.
aggressive, right? And the man, whereas before he was orientated to not hitting a woman because that was his teaching in that way. There were no points for beating women, right?
Mm.
No, no, of course, there's domestic violence been forever and a day and always happened. But what
Mm.
I'm saying is, it's not something you would have proudly stated to your mates, whereas you would proudly state to your mates, oh,
Yeah.
I knocked his teeth out when he did this, right?
Yeah.
There's no points for beating a woman in that time. Now, of course, equality, there becomes points somehow, or
Mm.
potential points. So the thing holding you back not to hit someone, a female, is now much, much less. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you
Yeah.
understand? The,
Yeah.
the orientation now is much, much less from how you're being brought up because, hey,
Yeah.
everybody's the same. So what difference does it make? Right? The orientation's less. Now, within that, there's going to be familial differences. There's going to be cultural differences about never hitting women, etc.,
Mm.
etc. But the
Mm.
point is that the societal difference is there. So
Mm.
what I'm saying is that we are orientating our society, and the law of unintended consequences is
Mm.
bringing about things that we don't want to happen, but we're still giving fear of a much greater level of violence against women than that actually really is.
Yeah. I mean,
Now,
yeah,
one last bit I've got to play on
um,
that. So now you get your Andrew Tate type people,
mm.
and very, very easily he says, so, okay, he knows the figures. Right? So he says, so you getting killed, man, doesn't matter.
Mm.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You getting killed doesn't matter. The same way as you losing your job doesn't matter. So he now starts making a whole load of connections that maybe not there. But what he's doing is that because he's now seeing it and he utilizes that for his power base.
Mm.
Right? And that's the law of unintended consequences because it wasn't thought through behaviorally about what it will mean for everybody. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Please, Dr.
Yeah.
Rachel.
I mean, and this is the thing as well, when we're sort of considering, you know, anxiety related environments, in that I've been sort of considering and pondering a lot in the past month about down regulated empathy.
Oh,
Now,
what
I
is
want,
that, please? Explain that.
yeah. So what I've been noticing through rhetoric and how people have been responding to each other, and just the general sort of mood of the nation, which most people like, sort of, if you were looking at news stories, you've got loads of people who are full of rage, you've got loads of people who are apathetic, you've got a few people who are, so unwell that they're resigned to a lifetime on benefits. You've got people who are working so hard that they're burnt out because they're trying to prop the economy up. So, this is what we're sort of dealing with. And what I've noticed, and we're dehumanizing whole swathes of people, and dehumanization is can be wrapped up in sort of downregulated empathy. Now, people bond, people have in groups through a chemical process where the predominant neurotransmitter and hormone is oxytocin. Now, oxytocin works on a positive feedback loop in that we have to actually be doing something pro-social, for us to get healthy amounts of oxytocin. And there's not been very many pro-social things going on within our society. There's lots of antisocial things, there's lots of fear mongering, there's lots of misinformation as well as malinformation and disinformation. We've had all the different categories of information apart from, an information that is true and certain for us. And all of this combines into people sort of forming their own version of the truth. Um, and that's where you sort of get the, misconception that women are, far more likely to get murdered than men because it's so high up in sort of the social profile about domestic violence. And then, when we get people talk about somebody's been stabbed on the street in London, then that's gang violence. That's nothing to do with us because we're not part of gangs. Everything gets sectioned and put in nice, neat little boxes.
Right.
But most of this you can sort of explain is that most human beings now have been sort of conditioned not to be empathetic to all human beings. That you
Right.
reserve empathy for people who you think are your people, rather than having the broader basis of that we are all human beings and therefore, we need to
Mm.
find common ground and we're better together and we can have real improvements if we work together. Now, with the rise of social media, there's echo chambers everywhere. There's like where people can go and just moan about things and there's no real solutions. You've got your controlled opposition on, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, that kind of thing, where they're saying what other people are thinking, but haven't got the platform to say, all of
Mm.
these things. And that actually does give rise to, higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of disconnection, lower levels of empathy. And also, it then can lead to and this is an actual brain function of helplessness. In that the
Interesting.
brain actually decides to not problem solve, not try to work out what to do different because it's too energy expensive. So it's better to do nothing. It's better to not help yourself. It's better just to, it's almost like you're an animal trying to find cover. Apart from you don't even need cover, you're just going to stand there and just do nothing. It's this helplessness all the time. And like I said, this is what the kind of anxiety, this is like sort of the extreme version of anxiety in that the alarm bell has been going off for far too long and too loudly, and nothing has worked. Nothing is going to work. The environment is never going to change, and therefore the desired outcome is just to do nothing until such a point that somebody either rescues you or, the environment changes to enable you to recover. And that's a really interesting phenomenon because I don't see any appetite in our leadership to change the environment at all in any of the main areas of society. So if you've got anywhere you can see any glimpses of optimism, Carlton, please share. But I
Well,
don't see any appetite to make the environment better for Joe Public.
I think you're absolutely right, and I was just hitting on that thing about in group, out group, etc., etc. And you said violence, stabbing people in London. Well, this is interesting because when you look at that, that's a pushed position. Don't get me wrong, it happens, and people are killing each other in London by stabbing each other, craziness. But you see, the thing is that the number one, city of 8 million people, folk knocking about, involved in crime as they always have been, people trying to make a living, cost of living extremely high. Um, there's a trade there which makes good money, the narcotics trade.
Mm,
And that trade, frankly, is a trade of the consumer. If there's no
mm,
consumption, there is no trade. Right, right,
yeah,
right. And so that's the thing. Remember the ice cream wars in Glasgow?
yeah,
So they had ice cream wars. It wasn't about the ice cream, it was about the fact that you had the facility to sell from an ice cream vehicle that you could sell everything you wanted to. So there was big money being made. It's all about the money. You got to remember that. It's about the money. Now, sometimes it's forgotten as to why the conflict started because then it becomes, and I'd like for you to speak on that
mm,
as well. Imagine a kid who's going to school who's very, very anxious because his mate from his crew has been stabbed and
mm,
he may now be stabbed in revenge because they've forgotten what the original reason for the stabbing was, but now the revenge comes in. No, but the thing is this why I mentioned that. The
mm.
number one place for people to be murdered by gangs in the United Kingdom forever and a day was Glasgow.
Mm.
Right? It was not London. It was not amongst blacks in London. It was amongst Glaswegian white gangs who used to kill each other. Now, the reason they dealt with that quite well by a connection between the police and the health service.
Mm.
And they put together a process of dealing with it in that way. Don't get me wrong, you still got people being stabbed, and you still do. And there's a big drugs place up there because, you know, the number one place where people die from drugs, again, is up in Scotland.
Mm.
So there's a big drugs aspect there. People make money out of it. And because you make money out of it, there's always going to be problems because that's how you defend your patch, etc., etc.
Mm. Mm.
So it's not really the colour of individuals or even the culture of individuals or anything like that. It's what's behind the money-making processes. Now, I believe that there was a time when you had gangster rap music coming from the United States, in particular into Britain, and then Britain's versions of that that did not aid that situation at all.
Mm.
That I think made it worse because you're creating that anxiety, like what you were saying,
Yeah.
creating that anxiety. And there was versions of that all over the place. You could even go back to the IRA times and the music that glorified the those conflicting against the British that
Mm.
actually created that to keep going, keep going with the
Mm.
songs in the names of Bobby Sands or whomever. Yeah, keep
Mm.
going, we'll fight on till we get what we need, blah, blah, blah. So there's many, what I'm trying to do though is say it's multifaceted. But the
Yeah.
point I'm making is that comes together. So when I say, is there any difference in society changing? Now, society wants to change stuff. The ruling elite wants to change stuff to its advantage. But do the disadvantages of changing it outweigh the advantages? I think that's what they've always got to think about.
Mm.
So if you look at the reason why one speaks about women and girls now, is because now there are votes in it.
Yeah.
Women have always been beaten in the home, right?
Yeah.
Let's be realistic about it.
Yeah.
Were people going on about that? No, they weren't, because frankly, there's no votes in it.
Yeah.
Right? Now there's votes in it. So
Mm.
the politician, to my mind, and don't get me wrong, there are some good politicians, but to my mind, the politician is the most detrimental person in society,
Yeah.
right?
Agreed.
Because these people, 9 times out of 10, to get where they want to get to, utilize everything. And very few things, like in television, are actually accidentally put forward.
Yeah.
They are focus grouped, they are considered. Now, the unexpected aspects thereof, because they don't delve deep enough, can be problematic. So I give you an example of it very quickly because I want you to come back in because you're more important than what I am. If you look at fighting the Afghans, okay, Afghan war, fighting the Afghans, we
Mm.
said we are going to fight the Afghan war to, number one, America's been attacked, that can't happen, get rid of Al Qaeda. Right, okay. Number two, what we want to do is stop there being a safe haven for people like Al Qaeda, so we're going to stop that. Three, we used women are being treated badly by the Taliban. We want to stop that and bring women and girls back out. Right. So I'm going to take you back now to the Soviet invasion, use the word of invasion, of Afghanistan. Okay?
Mm.
First and foremost, they did not invade. They were asked to come in by the ruling government of Afghanistan. Right? They didn't do it. Then the guy who'd asked them was murdered. I could give you all the names, but it's pointless to just say it very quickly. The guy who asked them, the Prime Minister, was murdered. And because some in the Politburo, because he'd been to the Patrice Lumumba school in Moscow, were friends, they said, oh, now we're going to invade. One reason, because the people who took over were communists, who were pure communists, and who were believing in, and it's a communist theory, perpetual revolution. In other words, you keep the revolution going because otherwise you create your own ruling class, right? So we're going to basically kill a whole load of people like they did in the killing fields in Kampuchea, right? So that's what that leads to. The Soviets didn't want that happening on their backyard because it made communism look bad, so therefore they went in under General Najibullah, who became then in charge, right? So,
Mm.
so they go in, right? What does the United States say? We need to defeat the Soviet in Afghanistan. And obviously, we go with the United States. So, what they do is they create a reason. And the reasoning is, and the guy's written a book called Ghost Wars, you can look it up. The guy who was the head of station in Islamabad, obviously Pakistan next door, and they create, let's tell them this is a holy war. The Soviets are infidels, they believe in no God. We believe in the book. I don't know if you know, the book is everybody who believes in the book, in the Kitab, is the three peoples. Islam is the last, Christianity, the one before it, and the one before them all, in that terms, Judaism. So those people are all of the book. So even people in Islam say, yeah, okay, they're of the book, so they believe they are believers. Whereas these Soviets are non-believers. Sort them out. That's what they push to these people. They create the schools, right? And the Taliban basically means the educated ones into religion. They create the schools, yeah, and then they push these people back into Afghanistan to fight the Soviet. They bring over Bin Laden to fight the Soviet, and the what was known subsequently as the Afghan vets, people from all over the world who happen to be Islamic who want to fight in the war. They're all supported. They provide them with the latest kit, Stinger missiles, etc., 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 and they fight the Soviets, and they defeat the Soviets with a lot of aid from special forces of the United States, Great Britain, intelligence services, blah blah blah. Soviets are defeated. Fantastic job, well done. Now we've no longer got any interest, right? Our interest is over. But and this is where the downside comes. Under the Soviet system, and prior to that, the king of Afghanistan, who was still in place under the first pseudo-communist, which was actually socialist orientation, right? They had people, women in universities in Kabul in miniskirts and long hair showing, right? They were not all covered over. Yes, in the Pashtun regions in the south they were, but in the areas that were, you could say, urban in orientation, and the northern areas bordering the Soviet Union, women were in miniskirts, blah, 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 just like they were anywhere else, right? What we did is supported a people that were going to put them out of miniskirts into cloth from head to toe. And then we go in subsequently and say, we are going to stop women from being in cloth head to toe, right? And we've actually supported the people that created that process. See what I mean?
Yeah.
These are the half-truths. These
Yeah.
are the things that we're not educated to. And what I found interesting from what you said is the willingness of people not to look at all of the facts and information. Because if you want to, you can see that. You can look at Afghanistan 1974 and you will see women in miniskirts and then going to Kabul University. You will see that. But you don't want to look at it. Because why? Are you ignorant or are you just not interested? So what I'm trying to say is with that little story, of which I had some involvement because of my role, not in obviously undermining, but I understand the whole processes, was because our government had decided this is the route we're going to take,
Yeah.
right? And a Secretary of State once said to me, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, a good guy actually, as it happens, is he said, because I was saying, why the hell are we doing everything the Americans doing and not standing for our own policy? And this Secretary of State said, because with the US, we can punch above our weight. Right? So
Yeah.
my point was, it's okay punching above your weight if you're punching for your title.
Yeah.
If you're punching for somebody else's title, I don't think you're punching above your weight.
Yeah.
I think you become a vassal. You didn't like it. Right. So that's the difference. So there we are with this discussion. So this is how politicians subordinate themselves for
Yeah.
advantage. Do you see what I'm saying? You're now telling me that there is a brain function that orientates you to that.
Yeah. There is.
Please continue.
I mean, and this is, it's really it's like quite frustrating to sort of see how our central nervous systems are constantly used against us when, there's a big thing about how we're meant to take individual responsibility to actually create the greater good and stuff like that. When what is actually happening is that there's a really concerted effort to control people and make them behave in certain ways so that other individuals can actually I suppose, improve and exceed their own aspirations. And that's where we're, where we currently are. And, it's really interesting, to sort of look at things objectively, look at rhetoric, look at sort of the general trends in society, look at what the algorithms actually allow to have a platform.
True.
And this is so interesting for me because somebody had a couple of weeks ago I went to have a meeting with someone and we had a bit of a heated debate because I don't use social media at all. And this person was kind of saying to me, well, how do you expect to change a system if you don't even, connect to people on their level? And I went, well, I think we're at a bit of a misunderstanding because I don't want to change the system because the system will self-defend. And anybody wanting to change the system actually is on a suicidal mission because the system will destroy them before you actually make any changes in the system.
Poetry.
And I said, algorithms are set up that no matter how eloquently I wrote or how much emotion I put in there for people to look at, minimal people will still see it because the algorithm is not set up to like people like me have that voice on social media. So basically we have this situation where we have an environment that's literally crushing people. And then we have echo chambers that are allowed to prevail where people feel like they're being heard and seen. And this is a piece of writing I'm currently doing on Substack saying this current, zeitgeist for people wanting to be seen and heard, that's really not what people need. People are doing that, and that's a reductionist thing where people think that they're actually being listened to or viewed for themselves, and it's not. It's like a holding capacity where people can sort of negate our responsibility, saying, "Well, I listen to you." Well, people don't want to be listened to and then no action taken. People want other people to feel how they feel, and then maybe they will understand why they're in so much pain or why they are, really struggling with what's going on at the minute. And that's a real issue. And let's just, say for 1 minute and be really, cynical about this. How would it benefit those in charge or those corporations for everybody to be well? Who benefits from well people?
Well, I think, and this is what I want you to come back onto the anxiety fully
Yeah,
towards the end of what will be part two, because, and it's my fault, you know me, my brain jumps into different areas,
yeah,
etc. But I just want to for you to just figure it out because there's two things I want to know. How many scientists of your level think like you think? How many have, I was going to say, taken the Queen's shilling and basically, but it's a corporate shilling, and basically just say, fair enough, I know what the real reason is, but let's go with this because this gives me a salary. This
mm,
looks after me. And because of you, as you said, the brain's going to take the line of least resistance. I think that's what I'm taking from what you said.
yeah, yeah.
Why would they not then turn around and say, I'll just take that and I get well paid and I'll articulate what they want me to articulate
Mm,
rather than put a challenge in against them.
mm,
So what's that level at? Obviously you can't know
yeah,
it precisely, but you can give me a kind of feel as to how many would be on your side. And,
yeah.
and and then the other thing is that in our question in terms of how many are game playing the system in terms of those saying they've got anxiety, who know damn well they haven't got anxiety. Now, you can't give me absolute figures, but know
Mm,
that that's an easy route in. And again, from what you seem to be saying, is that that would be something that the brain would naturally do for cunning people
Mm,
who would say, this is an easy route to make a couple of quid and I
mm,
do what I want. So again, the brain might lend itself to that. Because what
mm,
I'm saying is that what we seem not to understand very, very well in the United Kingdom, probably because it's not necessarily large sums of money always, but that the politician is in a, okay, crudely you could say he's bought, but in reality, the people with the power, the billionaires, the multi-millionaires, these people have the power to corrupt people very, very easily. Because you mentioned about the health system, right? I'll tell you something again, and I'll tell you exactly what was said to me. And I'll tell you that I reported it, right? Because I was a special branch officer, right? At this particular role, wasn't when I was in there, I was a special branch officer. So I go to this function in an embassy, and a guy comes up to me whom I have seen on occasions, and he says, "How you doing, Carlton? Blah blah blah. Nice to see you again." And I recognise him. All right, how you doing? All right. And he says to me, he's a minister, a UK minister, and he's in a particular role. And he says to me, "I'm sick and tired of," and I'm not going to say the role, etc. He said, "But I'm sick and tired of uh, telling, sitting in surgery and somebody coming up saying a dog is, putting its excreta on the pathway and asking me, can I deal with it?" He says,
mm,
just last week, he said, "I was dealing with a major event as the minister, blah, 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 blah." I said, "Well, why do I have to deal with this rubbish as well?" I said, "Because under our system, as you well know, you are first and foremost a constituency MP, which is giving you the position to be the minister, albeit,
mm.
yes, I am aware you can make ministers from people who are
Yeah.
in the House of Lords. But generally, you're going to be a minister because you're in the House of Commons and you're an MP. Right. So he's been given this role. He's a minister of a powerful department and obviously under the Secretary of State of that department. And he was doing some big bits. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. So he said, "I'm sick and tired of this stuff I'm doing. Why can't it be like America?" I said, "Because they've got a different system. The president comes in and just says, you are now the minister for this or the Secretary of State for this. And that's what happens. But your longevity might not be there." He said, "Yeah, but what they do, this is the thing, when they leave the role, yeah, they go into business because of what they know." Right? And then he said this to me, and I'm contemplating exactly that because what I know now, I can make a whole host of money, right, when I leave as a minister.
Mm,
And I'm
yeah.
going to do that, and I'm going to work for blah, blah, blah. Because if I tell you companies, whatever, you'll know what ministries we're talking about. So, of course, I'm an SP officer. I write this report, goes into the branch, right? And obviously, the security service are going to get a copy of the report. What happens? Nothing, of course.
Mm,
Right? But this guy's already orientated to himself. Yeah.
mm,
This is where the money is. The money is not doing the role that he's doing. Yeah. The money is post this role. He said to me, 18 months. I think he's doing himself short. He probably had 24 months of actually being very relevant as to where companies needed to put their money in his particular sphere of influence.
mm.
That is writ large, I believe, in our system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, from what you've said to me today, I first and foremost now understood why it's writ large in our system. Because you've just told me is that the brain sometimes looks for that simplest route to look after yourself.
Mm,
So
yeah.
he can justify that to himself very easily.
Mm.
Am I right? Or am I overplaying your words?
No, I think you're right to, to a certain extent. And I think the it kind of ties in nicely with your question about how many you know, scientists go against the system, or how many are that sort of individual, basis thinking about themselves. And it's often a really interesting debate that I have, and often speak to my husband about, because you know, basically, most scientists work for organizations or work within organizations that are given money by other organizations to test things, try things, hypothesize about things. And there's a kind of inference that there's a kind of outcome that's wanted from it.
Right.
So it's kind of difficult because, there's very few instances where it's actively acknowledged that there might be bias, and sometimes you can only find out about the bias or the conflict of interest when you delve deep, because most people have to say where their funding has come from, most people have to say if there are any conflicts of interest, but it's never predominant, and it certainly wouldn't be within any kind of main body of a publication. It might come in sort of the admin information at the end of it. um I think there's also an issue in that, what is truth? What is truth? It's very
Yes, true.
nuanced. I often, say to people that we're living in quite polarized times, and when we look at the polarization, it's the stuff in the middle that is more likely to be true and is more likely to be more frightening. And we never touch upon that.
Mm.
That the polarization of things is, a huge issue, in that it kind of waters down any truth. And there's also, there's quite a lot of major studies that have not been found, which sort of form the bedrock of quite sweeping generalizations of humanity, which then are not able to be replicated or reproduced.
Mm.
And there's there's a reticence from scientists to say that the original findings may have not been presented in the right, the best possible vein, or there might have been a mess up with the data, or there might have been a bias there. Often what they'll say is that there was either false positives or false negatives, or, people are in a different time. So there's never any, definitive, this is the truth and this is not the truth. Everything is always under a caveat, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unless there has to be, prevailing universal direction of travel for something. And in that times, if you go against the science, then you are ridiculed. Often you can be vilified. You can be, struck off. I've got colleagues over in America who whistle blew on the CDC during the pandemic
Mm.
and have struggled to find work in their area ever since,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they stood against the perceived socially acceptable norm. And that's the environment that you're working in, that there's not many people who will it's not just stand up and be counted, but who are economically robust enough to do that, because it's committing political, sort of career suicide many
Yeah.
times,
True.
because the people with the money are far more powerful than people with the knowledge.
True. True.
And that's what you're working against. And that in itself leads to, a whole issue of, particularly around issues like anxiety, in that there's often sort of the defensiveness, which is why I think that anxiety is considered a disorder, because then it puts it back on the individual, doesn't it? There's
Right.
something wrong with you if you have anxiety, not there's something wrong with the collective environment, therefore we need to fix it so that less people feel anxiety. And interestingly, it should never be the only form of sort of treatment for any kind of anxiety issues, for it just to be medicated. The sort of the gold standard would be to have some sort of therapeutic intervention as well, so that actually then helps somebody understand why they might have higher levels of anxiety than somebody else. And when we get to the prevalence of it in society now, and why so many people um talk about their anxiety almost like it's part of them, and that's their identity. Rather than it being that it's part of them, it's their identity. I am anxiety, therefore I can't function. We sort of have to look and at what society we are creating and projecting really. And I was listening to what you were sort of saying about the gang members and things like that. And what came to my mind was that when we are wanting people to change, it depends on what resources that they have to enable that change. So if we're talking about somebody growing up in Glasgow when there was all the gang warfare, and when you look at the demographic of who was involved, what were their options? You
Exactly.
know, yeah, what were the options? And we have to remember that when we're dealing with stuff like this, you look at what somebody's options are. Now, somebody who perhaps has had a really life-changing adverse event that's happened to them, maybe in their 30s, um, and then gets severe anxiety response because of it, but up until that point, they've had a relatively supported, relatively resourceful life, are going to deal with that adverse life event in a much better way than somebody who has zero resourcefulness, or very little resourcefulness or very little choices.
Mhm.
Um, and I sort of wonder at what kind of adults we are producing with how children are being given labels at such a young age, when actually what I see in the majority of these children is distress, not a disorder. And the antidote for distress is comfort and connection.
Mhm.
But when you walk around and maybe you go to a restaurant, maybe you go to a cafe, or maybe you go just anywhere where traditionally there would have been proper human interaction, people might be sat with each other, but are they connecting?
Mhm.
And I'm just asking you, what do you see people connecting with when you go out?
Well, on the mobile phones, aren't
Yeah. So they're not connecting with each other, are they?
they? Mm.
And you see that in families. You see whole families where everybody from the baby up to the eldest member of the family is on some kind of device. That's going to lead to distress, but then we're labeling it as if there's something wrong with that person, something wrong with that child. They've got some kind of neurodiverse, developmental issue. They've got anxiety. They struggle around people. They are not toilet trained at 4 years old. And you can like anything, you can put a disorder on anything, but what we are doing is actually saying that that person has got a label, and then that person, it doesn't, people don't stay a child forever. They're growing up, and then what kind of adults are they growing up into?
Well, do
And
they? Do they grow up? I
well,
mean,
this is it. Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
listening. People are telling me, you see, I believed in children and young persons.
Yeah,
Right. So young persons, 13 upwards to about 18, something like that.
yeah,
Right. Right. Now everybody's a child. So
yeah.
the other thing is it takes away responsibility from you, doesn't it? Because you're a
Yes,
child.
it
So
does.
you don't know what
Yeah,
you're doing, do you? You're a child.
yeah,
Oh, he's only a child. I heard somebody recently on this Epstein thing. The person was 23 years of age, and they were saying, oh, they were just a child. Well, hang
yeah,
on. Most
yeah,
people in my era, right, had four kids or something like that when they were 23 years of age.
yeah,
You get
yeah,
what I'm saying, right?
yeah,
And we're living in a time, and this is the other question I asked you, we're living in a time when there was no assistance. The only
yeah,
thing you would have got would have been, and I saw a guy recently that I haven't seen for 50 years, 55 years, right? I saw him recently. He had a kid when he was 17, 18. People didn't turn around and say he's a child. At
yeah.
no stage did they say that. He had a kid. He managed to get a house. He was
Mm,
working. Uh, um, and yeah, okay. So him and his wife split later, but he had a kid. And he was living with his wife. They were married and they were doing their work. Now, all they got in terms of government assistance was child what they used to call it, child, not child support, they called
No,
it
they call it child allowance, didn't they? And
child
it changed to
allowance.
child
Yeah,
benefit.
child allowance, exactly. He
Yeah,
got his child allowance for the one child, and if he'd had 10,
yeah,
you get child allowance for 10. So that's all you got, nothing else, nothing
mm,
else, right?
mm,
So, but now you're hearing people, oh, I was 23 and I was taking abuse. 23, I didn't know what I was doing. Well, why don't you know what you're doing? This guy was looking after a family. His
yeah,
wife was doing everything, right?
yeah,
Everything, and I mean everything, right?
yeah,
Right? And the headache of where's the money coming in from,
yeah.
right? So this is the difference. So why is it now that we've got this childlike? Does that not push us back? Does that
Well,
not,
yeah,
take away
you
from
know,
us?
it's really interesting because, from a personal perspective, when my middle child, he literally just did a term in secondary school, and one of my great gripes with that school, of many, was the infantilization of certain things. Like they had a clip-on tie at the age of 11, and I was like, I don't want him to have a clip-on tie.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
11 years old, he can tie a tie.
absolutely.
And I said, and if they can't tie a tie at 11, then they've got deeper problems than you
Mm.
actually are saying that they've got. And I said, why are they not having, why are they not allowed a proper tie? And the head of year said to me, because it gives great anxiety that they can't
Oh
get dressed
no,
quick enough after they've
no,
had
no.
sports.
Sorry,
And
I'm sorry.
I
I'm
was
sorry.
like, well, how can we opt out of this? I said, learning how to do things in an efficient manner is like a major part of life. And I said, and if my son at 11 years old can't tie a tie, I'd consider myself a failure as a parent.
Mm.
You know, I tied a tie from being 7 years old. I
Absolutely,
had to wear a tie every day for school. I was
absolutely,
7 when I learned how to
absolutely.
tie a tie. It wasn't a big issue. And I'm just like, this is the kind of thing, and like, you have to ask yourself, like, if anybody knows about the benefit system in the UK, it's incredibly difficult to get them. It's like a full-time job to get them
Yeah,
in the first
yeah,
place. And then when you've got them, you can only keep them as long as you are perceived unwell as you were when you got them. So there's
yeah.
no incentive to get better,
True that.
because I think there was a little bit of analysis done, and if you are a family with two children, you'd have to be to get the same in a paid job and a salaried job, you'd have to be bringing in £90,000 pre-tax
Mm.
to get the same amount as you get
On
on
benefits.
benefits in the UK.
Mm.
So there's not much incentive
Well,
to
that's why they
clock
got in
them.
work benefits.
Yes,
You see,
in work.
that's the big
Because
mistake. In work benefits. Why would you
in
have in
work
work
benefit,
benefits?
yeah, but in
Because
work,
that makes
because
the
now,
employer not pay out.
well, this is it, because people get topped up, don't they, by universal credit.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so it's like, so you have to, and this is, perhaps a topic to for another day. In If you're a deep thinker, if you're a philosopher, or if you're just literally just thinking what's going to happen next, what kind of society is going to be created when there's only a few who actually are able to achieve things without the help of from universal credit?
Hmm.
Where's
Agreed.
the incentive for people to strive to do better?
Agreed.
And this is really important, because if there's not an incentive, if there's not that extrinsic motivation, there's very few people who have intrinsic motivation, so internal motivation to improve themselves, because everybody is burnt out through living in such a toxic environment. So, even if you're not normally a deep thinker, just think to yourself, what are the next steps for a society where there's only a few who are paying into the pot because they're intrinsically motivated to do something, when everybody else is extrinsically motivated not to? It doesn't bode well for the UK, to be honest.
Truth. And finally, I'm just going to leave it on this, is that I think, and I can't prove it as yet, but I think that many are playing the system. I think many say, I've got anxiety, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do the other. Yeah. Because frankly, it's an easy way to get paid.
Mm.
No, I can't prove it.
Yeah, but Carlton, what we need to, if the system didn't want people to have, have anxiety on that level, there should be a lot more investment in teaching people and encouraging people and facilitating resilience to actually understand what their anxiety response is about and actually helping them to develop more beneficial coping strategies, which means that they are not sitting at home getting any kind of sort of assistance to stay at home with anxiety.
Yeah.
But I don't see that happening either.
Neither do I. And of course, on leaving, I'll say my last bit, on leaving, I think that what you will find is if you've treated people as children all the way up to the age of 18, and as soon as they've come and said to you, I feel anxious, which is what happens now. My wife was teaching, so they say, I feel anxious. And they say, oh, well, step out of the class for a while, do this, whatever. That's what the teachers are taught to say. Step out of the class for a while, do this, or we'll get you some other type of work to make you less anxious, blah, 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 right? You soon learn to play that system. And if you don't, let's argue, you've not learned to play that system, you've built up no resilience anyway. So when you do have to go into the real world of work and somebody says something to you, you haven't completed that job, mate. Right? Oh, your anxiety's played up and you're gone. So now you're anxious. So it is, if you will, a devil's circle.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've gone over some extremely intricate and deep subjects today talking about anxiety, Carlton.
Do you know what that's made me think? Just like we've done with our book that's soon to come out, we call it a compendium because it's short, sharp, sweet, and can aid and assist you like a self-help reader. We need to do one on anxiety, I would suggest.
Well, I think we should do the politics of anxiety.
Absolutely. I'll do the politics part, you do the medical. Are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Great
Yeah.
stuff.
You
Okay.
heard it here first, listeners.
You did, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much. And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And we'll see you again next week.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.